It's my pleasure to introduce Jennifer Lakey. Jennifer's the Global Director of the Energy Program for the World Resources Institute. She has spent a good part, maybe all of her career, working on sustainability issues. Jennifer, you can clarify that. And WRI has done some really groundbreaking work on sustainability, advancing sustainability solutions for corporate customers. In the past 1.5 to 2 years, we at EEI and IEI have been partnering with the World Resources Institute, with Jennifer's team, on this customer sustainability issue. And it's really been a very successful collaboration with these. And we were able to develop and launch an electric company carbon emissions reporting database for corporate customers this past June as a result of that collaboration. So Jennifer, we really appreciate that. We appreciate all the work that you did and that you're still doing to move that forward. So with that, I'm delighted to turn the floor.
And thanks to EEI and IEI and the team for this opportunity to talk with you about a topic that's been near and dear to my heart, as Lisa said, my entire career, and that is around bringing sustainability and climate protection into our economy in a mainstream. And today, I wanted to with a few opening thoughts on the journey we've been on together over these years, and secondly, to look at the path ahead of us, because the moment is ripe for continued system transformation and innovation, and we look to all of you as partners in this process. Someone's got some noise in the background, if you could mute. Thank you. Okay. So with my opening, I just wanted to reflect on this journey. And I started in this space in 2000, working with a small group, a dedicated group of 10 companies to try and get 1 gigawatt in 10G developed for corporate customers. That was our Green Power Market Development Group. It launched what I would consider to be an amazing 2 decades of progress. As we've seen in these 2 decades, we've gone from having these 10 companies to having over 150 companies around the world and in the United States participating in renewable energy purchasing. And that's a remarkable path. But of course, it doesn't stop with renewable purchasing. As Lisa laid out in her opening, we really do fundamentally recognize the need for this shift to low carbon resources and a very clear set of metrics associated with how to make that shift happen. Yesterday's session I found fascinating, looking at load shaping, looking at carbon as the metric, even as we know there are other performance metrics that utilities have to manage for. But clearly these are times where the corporate buyers metrics that utilities have to manage for. But clearly these are times where the corporate buyers, the urban energy agenda, the state level policy and energy agenda, and utility agenda is converging. It's been a remarkable past 5 years. I just want to note that one of the things that agenda is converging. It's been a remarkable past 5 years. I just want to note that one of the things that I would consider to be a signal of the maturation of this market was the spinoff that we did along with World Wildlife Fund and Rocky Mountain Institute and Business for Social Responsibility of REBA, a new industry association completely dedicated to helping corporate buyers navigate and build for success in their renewable energy purchasing and their decarbonization efforts. That partnership is a part of what I would consider to be the growing partnering approach to managing for economy. Along with all of you, we worked in a very close collaboration around how to make bridge with tools, how to make tools happen together that can bridge the needs on data and information around the successes and around the journey that we're on. So in looking at the agenda for today and the go forward agenda, there are really 3 things that I would encourage us to begin to focus on. First is this role of partnerships. As I mentioned, we see that as critical in our strategies within WRI to help build that clean energy economy, the low carbon future that we are all looking for. Second is really to begin to think through, and I know we talked about this yesterday, the decarbonization of sectors of the economy that can be electrified, looking at transportation, looking at heat, and really beginning to focus in on the role of the utilities, not just with renewable energy procurement, but also in decarbonization of the end use more broadly. And then finally, the kinds of innovations that we need to see that focus on the ability to engage in a constructive policy framework and dialogue around markets, policy, and the approaches that we can take together to advance this agenda. So I'm going to start a little bit with the corporate and other end use sectors and the ability to do procurement quite differently. The procurement approach that we've taken has been one where the product requests and the innovation requests have come from the buyers into the marketplace for differentiated products. Now, I do think that the importance of the procurement approach has gone far beyond now the corporates as the primary use of the procurement mechanisms. Today, we have a partnership that we're working on with cities and municipalities across the United States. It's part of a program that's called the American Cities Climate Challenge, funded by Bloomberg Philanthropies, and we're working very closely with Rocky Mountain Institute, one of our longstanding partnerships, to help cities engage in renewables procurement. Lisa mentioned at the outset some of the kinds of documents that we've been developing that allow customers to measure their carbon emissions, but also the kinds of procurement opportunities around green tariffs, which I know was attached into the appointment here, and the importance of recognizing innovation in tariffs and in products is something that I wanted to highlight today. I was struck in looking at that document at just how far we've come. When we started looking at green tariffs in 2015 within WRI and the REBA program, there was only one or two products that were actually geared for corporate use. Today, according to the report, there are over 37% of corporate renewable energy products are procured through. That is remarkable. 36 electric company green tariff programs are approved or pending, and that is quite a scale up. But those are also often going to be niche products, and right now we're looking at how to diversify that to allow cities to also access these types of green tariff programs. Those are different types of consumers. They have different needs, and we look for innovation in this space of municipal and city-wide green tariff programs and other types of products that you all may be able to offer over time. I would note that one of the things that I found most compelling recently is that the cities themselves are increasingly looking at how to do a bifurcated approach, how to look at the on-site and local needs of the community to participate in the clean energy economy. And for utilities, these are important signals, right? So thinking about where we're in energy economy. And for utilities, these are important signals, right? So thinking about where we see community energy, community solar, the kinds of products and innovation that cities are looking for are going to be much more place-based, where we saw the corporates being able to embrace things like virtual power purchase agreements in some markets, or working very much on corporates being able to embrace things like virtual power purchase agreements in some markets, or working very much on the large scale projects. Cities are creating a much more balanced portfolio between smaller projects that may be grid connected or may be dedicated, but that really need to address local concerns around equity, local concerns around the kinds of workforce development and programming that may be available to them in close proximity within their city or within their state. Those are important attributes for the cities to take forward. So I want to move from the procurement space and talking a little bit about how far we've come in that space to talking about where and how we see some of the opportunities for electrification. Clearly, the United States today is lagging behind other major markets like China in electrifying our vehicles. Whether that's bus fleets or whether it's private passenger vehicles, we know that the United States has not had a comprehensive strategy associated with electrification. Your members and the Powering the People sessions in the past, I think, have driven a lot of the agenda. I was also struck yesterday by the comment that the slowdown in purchasing of electric vehicles and perhaps the continued purchasing of internal combustion engines is actually lost revenue. It's actually a business impact associated with business as usual in the vehicle space. And I would encourage you to really think about that, because of course it both advances the decarbonization efforts. It can help us build back better the U.S. economy if we really truly embrace this shift to electric vehicles and electrified transportation as a whole. So our strategies associated with doing much more focused procurement in the EV space brings us together. And finally, buildings. The importance of thinking through product innovation and engagement approaches in the built environment has never been more pressing. I think all of you have seen the data associated with energy efficiency, and we covered some of this yesterday. Building energy efficiency is falling far behind in terms of the deployment of low carbon solutions and technologies. And the links between electrification of buildings, the transportation electrification, and energy efficiency have never been more compelling. So we need to really focus again on how we build these partnerships to do it. And let me end my opening comment reflection on what policy needs are today and what we do need to do in partnerships. So we've been very interested at WRI and elsewhere in the kinds of agenda-setting dialogues that could advance these topics. Let me just name a few. First, we know our Clean Power Council, which some of you participated in the last 2 years, which it was a project that concluded last year. We were able to identify some overlapping areas of opportunity and concern, how to take that forward into the context of helping support innovation in the utility is something that we're very eager to continue. We have a partnership that we've been running with the Great Plains Institute that is put out recommendations for policymakers for heavy industry. And the more that the utility sector can become in as a partner in those kinds of programming, I think it may be very important. It's called the I3 process, and there are recommendations on board. We'd welcome engagement from EEI's membership in that agenda as well. And finally, when we look at the kinds of things the markets are grappling with, we've been very pleased to see some of the overlapping agendas. We've been working with some of cities to help them build a seat at the table in terms of policy engagement, whether that's through the state-based or wholesale market engagements, or whether it's through processes that can be engaged with you on long-term planning for your resources to meet their needs. So this is a moment where in 2020, we have had a very challenging year, but we have a lot of opportunities to focus on that Build Back Better agenda, the partnership opportunities that we've seen. And I'm eager to hear from our friends at Google and Walmart, whose thunder I don't want to steal, because in fact, the kind of innovation that we're seeing around their needs, their requirements for 24/7 renewable energy or zero carbon energy, the need for supply chain engagement, and the ability for us all to connect these dots into a decarbonization pathway for the United States is incredibly important, and couldn't be more timely to be having this powering the people today.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. You teed up a lot of issues. So I'm just going to say a couple of things before we move on to the panel discussion. One, you teed up that we do have attached to the calendar appointment also an update on green tariff programs, and that does show a remarkable amount of progress in green tariff for that in the panel discussion today. I will say that our industry is extremely interested in electric transportation. We have a very, very active CEO task force on electric transportation that is focused not just on passenger vehicles and charging stations, but also on fleet electrification, are very, very important. And we actually made an announcement last week during National Electric Drive Week about our own industry commitment to electrifying our fleets. So we do view electric transportation as a hugely important issue and important to very, very important to the carbon discussion. So just wanted to put that on the table. We're on it. We do want more partners to help move it forward. So we will be following through on that. So with that, let me just turn it over to Mark now to start the discussion with the two corporate customers that we have here today, Chris from Walmart, and Chris from Walmart, and Caroline Golan from Google. Before we do that, we are not talking today necessarily about municipalities or cities. They are also very large customers. And that's another discussion, but Jennifer teed up some of those issues. And we do know that municipalities and cities, just like corporate customers, are demanding and wanting to find sustainability solutions. They may be a little bit different, but the basic idea is carbon reduction and moving sustainability forward. So that's an issue for maybe the next discussion. But for this one, we're going to be focused on corporate customers and sustainability solutions for those customers. So with that, let me turn it to Mark Lantrip from Southern Company, who is also the co-chair of the Institute for Electric Innovation, to move this discussion forward. Mark.
Thanks, Lisa. Welcome, everybody. And before we jump in there, I just got to give a thanks to Lisa and Michael and Adam for pulling all this off. I'm impressed each one of these video conferences that I participate in gets a little better each time. So it's I don't know if it's scary or if it's a good thing, but you guys appreciate what you've done. Look, man, who would have thought 2 years ago even that this whole notion of sustainability and ESG would have become such a big driver for corporate America, and then even especially so for utilities across the U.S. and Europe, and Asia and everywhere. It is one of the top 3 or 4 things that probably every utility has on their mind and on their objectives to deal with. And the interesting thing is, the reason is it's because it's important to customers. It's the right thing to do. It's important for the environment. But customers are at the center of the business. They always have been. It's not because regulators are telling us to do it. It's because we want to basically be our core strength for all of us in this industry. The ones that are going to survive are they're going to play a role in electrification and continuing that. And the world does run on electricity. And I think it will continue to run on electricity for as long as any of us can imagine. But I think the notion of helping our customers decarbonize for the industry, whether you're talking about a regulated business or you're talking about unregulated activities, I think the customer being at the center of everything we do is what's going to drive all of us. So it's been really interesting. Having been at Southern Company for 40 years, it's particularly interesting at this point in my career to sort of have a front row seat to all this stuff. So it's been a wild but exciting ride. Electric companies have already done an awful lot. I know you guys know this, but by the end of 2019, the power sector has already reduced carbon emissions, 33% or more beyond 2005. That's not a small feat, especially if you went back to 2005 and set that as a target. I think everybody would have run screening for the doors, but it happened. Then furthermore, I think I got to mention that I think that a large portion of the industry, particularly the IOUs, about 40% of the industry or more, have already got aggressive carbon reduction goals by intermediate goals to get us to 50% by 2030. And then to get us to net zero and net zero by 2050. And I think you're going to see more and more eventually come on, and ultimately the whole grid and the system, I think, will be adopting those goals. But these are huge steps for the industry to take that I don't think any of us would have bet money that it would have happened. 10 years ago. But we're glad it happened. I think it's an exciting time for the business. And it's been a pleasure to work with a lot of you, the customers, and Jennifer, WRI folks as well on these efforts. So hopefully we'll continue to do that. We'll talk about some of that as we go through the questions. So today, as Lisa said, we're going to talk about corporate strategies and what can we do to continue to achieve the energy future that the corporations and the customers of those corporations want everybody to achieve. So today, as Lisa mentioned, so we've got Steve Chris he's a director of energy services at Walmart, well-known individual in this space, and then Caroline Dolan, who is a North American markets lead for global energy policy and market development at Google. So Steve and Caroline, thanks for joining us, and welcome to this event. Listen, both of your companies have ambitious carbon reduction goals, and are well-known leaders in the area. Made a number of recent announcements. Steve, I want to start with you. At Walmart, the corporate sustainability goals have progressed over time quite a bit. Can you give us a little sketch of kind of where you guys are now and what has changed over time and kind of why you guys went down that path?
Sure, and good morning or afternoon to everybody on the phone. And I see Lisa smiling, so that means you guys can hear me. It's been one of those technical difficulty kind of mornings, so good karma flowing our way. So just a little bit of history. In 2005, we set an aspirational goal to be powered 100% by renewable energy. And in 2016, we updated that goal and added a hard target of 2025 to be powered 50% by renewable energy. We also set a goal for the 2025 timeframe of reducing our carbon emissions by 18%, which is a science-based goal. And we were the first retailer to set a science-based carbon goal. But given the growing climate crisis and with nature loss, we've really decided that we need to be more ambitious. And so a couple of weeks ago, we set out new goals. As they pertain to energy, and I'll mention the other ones, but today's discussion will really center around what we're doing on the energy ones. The first goal is we've set a goal to be 100% powered by renewable by 2035. And again, that's the hard target. We've disposed of aspirational zero carbon goal for 2040. And this is zero carbon without offsets. So really trying to drive carbon out of our consumption. And that goal doesn't just touch our facilities and utility service, but also our transportation fleet, as we set a goal to electrify and zero out emissions for the transportation fleet. We manage or restore at least 50 million acres of land and 1 million square miles of ocean. So these are super ambitious goals. There's a lot of work to be done, but we are Walmart, and we will continue to work to drive low costs for our operations and support everyday low prices for our customers. So much of our work around rate making and cost and resource selection will continue as we look to do this affordably and cost effectively.
A follow-up question on that. You mentioned offsets. Have you eliminated offsets entirely from any of your strategy?
So we do not have offsets in our strategy. The 2040 goal is 0, not 0.
Mm-hmm. Does that include things like when you make deliveries to customers' homes and businesses?
Yeah, so the entire scope of the operations, and that would fall under our transportation fleet. That's in there as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's really, it kind of falls into two pieces. Sounds negative. There's two channels of this. First, the renewable side really focuses on procurement. We need to procure the renewable energy to hit that 100%. The zero carbon goal has that procurement element to it, but it also becomes taking a broader look at utility systems and power systems. Because ultimately, if a lot of the charging, especially for transportation, is not going to be done behind a Walmart owned meter or a Walmart account, if you will. So, if we've got a truck or, we're doing deliveries out on the road and we need to recharge, we need to push that towards zero carbon as well. So it's about procurement, but it's also about transformation and transforming and decarbonizing power systems.
Thanks. Caroline, so I would ask you the same moving parts at Google, but could you give us some color on how you guys are thinking about this?
Sure, happy to, and thanks for having me. Steve and I have worked together on a lot of things, and I think it's great to have sort of two different facility models talking that are really sort of striving to lead their position. And at Google, we have focused primarily on our data centers because our data centers make up the largest share of our carbon footprint. And that's where we've focused a lot of our clean energy agenda, and really it's been the main part of our clean energy journey. It's been the main part of our clean energy journey. Back in 2007, we started by setting the goal to become, or in 2007, we set the goal to become carbon neutral and did that quite quickly. And at the time, that was really the only thing that was quite quickly. And at the time, that was really the only thing that was available to us, right? And over time, we sort of learned our ability to procure clean energy. And the A's, sorry about that. My children are just walking into the room. I'm going to get them out for a second. Children are just walking into the room. I'm going to get them out for a second. In 2007, we started working on our agenda to really procure new renewable energy, and we made the goal of going 100% renewable energy. So we went from carbon neutral in 2007. A decade later, we were 100% renewable by 2017, and learned a lot of lessons in the process, I think. And like Steve was saying, offsets were not really part of our agenda. We had always really committed to new steel in the ground, new projects. That was a big thing for us. And now, similar to Steve and Walmart, a few weeks ago, we came out with our new goal, which is to achieve 24/7 carbon-free energy, which is 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, for every single one of our data centers. For that to be powered by carbon-free energy. And so that is a very different goal than 100% renewable, and obviously requires a very different approach. And so we're really looking forward to that. In the U.S., we've set meeting that goal by 2030, and feel pretty confident that we'll be able to do it with our utility partners.
Great. Can I a follow-up question to both of you on that? So how does both Google and Walmart think about the notion of how do we accomplish these objectives without impacting both your customers and our customers, if you will, in terms of the cost to achieve these things? I mean, is it a topic of
I was waiting for Caroline to go first, but I can jump in. So there's a lot of pieces to this. In terms of looking at renewable procurement behind the meter deployments, we've got the wholesale market, virtual PPA structures, and then we have utility programs. Each of them touches everybody in sort of a different way. The on-site, the way that, the traditional way of talking about customers and for on-site is really around fixed cost recovery and the rate making process. Being a larger customer and having rate schedules apply to us that have demand charges and have more cost recovery like that, and that combined with our building load shapes, which tend to peak later in the afternoon, early evening, for us anyway, we don't necessarily see a lot of conflict on that piece because for the most part, on-site solar doesn't do a lot to our billing demands, except for maybe in the brightest of summer months. And to the extent that we do further deployments behind the meter with associated technologies like storage, there are standby rates, and there's other ways really to take care of that on the large, directly touch other customers other than bringing those resources onto the market can help to lower market prices, which benefits everybody. And then as we look at utility programs, we do take very specific interest around creating structures that don't harm non-participants. And then we also participate in and expand that pool of potential customers. I think I'll call it the Solar Together model. The Florida Power and Light has really been the first super large scale program that's been able to be used by all customer groups. And I know Duke in Florida has there, and I've had several other utilities bring that model in, just for the behind the scenes discussions as a potential because they see the value of having broader participation available and working through some of the issues that historically haven't really allowed for that, like comfort with term length and just scale. But it's certainly something that's front of mind because we want to do this for our customers in terms of bringing clean power to the grid and using that to keep our costs low. But we also, and we talked a little bit about this earlier in terms of the zero carbon and how it's really about power system transformation, is these movements, and not just our goals, but utility goals as well, will change things, and we need to ensure that things are done as cost effectively as possible. And we work through the process to ensure that risks around new technologies and different deployments are appropriately shared between shareholders and customers. I won't start on my construction work in progress rant. For everybody that. So it's certainly a lot of work to be done, but it's definitely front of mind.
Thanks. That's helpful. Caroline, you have any other comments on any of that? Does Google have a similar thought?
Sure. I mean, it's going to be top of mind for any business. What we've been, I think, lucky to see over the past several years is just this extreme cost decline in renewables, which has given our leadership at Google even more confidence in moving aggressively. Renewables are the cheapest option for us in the country, and Google and all data centers have a unique profile in that they are usually 90 to 95% sort of mission critical energy, and they have a pretty perfect, I like to say perfect load shape, reflective of the grid needs in those times. And so that gives us a lot of flexibility in terms of value stacking. But what it also does is it forces us to actually really think about how to best integrate, and really over the past year, we've been doing a lot of thought about this, but how to really integrate resources onto the grid, as Steve said, that are actually going to benefit all customer classes. I think what we've learned over the past, decade of doing this is that, renewables are cheap and you can put them onto the system quickly. But if they're not done in a way that really meets the needs of the greater grid, and all the customer classes, you can end up with some cost problems. And we've always been really adamant about making sure that we weren't pushing any cost to any customer classes. But now I think we're moving into proactively trying to figure out how we improve costs for other customer classes. And so that's something that we're very committed to. And a lot of that is, making sure we're coming up with new innovative tariff designs, making sure we're using resources to their full capacity as both generation sources, resources, in partnership with our providers. So cost is always going to be at top of mind, and making sure, I think Steve shares this, that, most of the customers that are in any space where we take electric service, are probably customers of Google. And so we take that to heart, and are actively trying to figure out the best way, most cost effective way to make this transition to carbon free energy.
Great.
Most cost effective way to make this transition to carbon free energy.
Great. Well, I think this is an area where we'll have to continue to collaborate. So hopefully that'll be the case as we go forward. Let's move on to some other questions. So at Google and Walmart, this is probably an easy one. So what are the key factors that drive you guys as corporations to drive your sustainability efforts? I mean, is it driven by your customers, investors, just management philosophy, all the above? And then this is a side question that goes along with it. Do corporations still have carbon goals and renewable energy goals?
Yes, it's driven by all of the above. It's driven by our employee retention. It's driven by investors. It's driven by our leadership. It's, we have a very active and very opinionated sector of our economy, especially with all the employees that we have all over the globe, and they care about this, and our leadership cares about this. I'll also say over the last several years, especially in North America, our pursuit of renewables has also been driven by cost. And if you make the market structure work, and you can make the PPA or the program work, it's in many places for us, we've seen it's the cheapest resource to go with. And if we are new load in an area, that it makes the most sense. So there's both a business among our employees and our customers and our leadership there. And, I think we're a little unique. We've been 100% renewable energy goal. Now we're moving to a carbon-free energy goal, which is different. And so, but that doesn't mean that renewables are not our carbon-free energy goal, right? And so for us, carbon-free energy includes nuclear, but it also includes, storage and hydro, and geothermal, and, new and advanced technologies that haven't come to market yet that we are going to be investing in and pushing. Advanced technologies that haven't come to market yet that we are going to be investing in and pushing. So it's a little bit of different than just, what has sort of been the historical wind and solar agenda.
Great. That was a good answer. Steve, would you add anything to that? Is Walmart somewhere? That was a good answer. Steve, would you add anything to that? Is Walmart somewhere?
Yeah, we're very similar. So we're really, we're driven by all of the above: our associates, our customers, and our investors. And then, and going back, I have to mention cost in every answer to every question. That's part of the answer to every question. That's part of my job. But, then, so because we need to, we want to do good for the world. I mean, we're a huge business. We released a white paper as part of our sustainability goal announcements a couple weeks ago. And it was really the first time we've actually put in public a consumption number for our global business. And so worldwide, we consume 27 million megawatt hours of electricity. That's just electricity. That's not gas. That's not propane or transportation fuels. And so we have quite it's a lot of consumption. But so we have a lot that we need to do to, bring benefits globally. And because we're so large, we we can leverage our scale to really deliver those benefits. And then, of course, doing it at the lowest cost possible so we can maintain our value proposition to our customers.
Thanks, Steve. A related question for you: is Walmart incorporating other aspects of environmental impacts like packaging and plastics and things of that nature? Does that also become part of the agenda for you guys?
So that has been on the agenda for quite some time, and our teams in sustainability continue to work on that engagement initiative called Project Gigaton, where we're working through our supply chain to drive out 1 billion metric tons of carbon by 2030. So there's a ton of work going on all fronts within sustainability, packaging, agriculture, transportation, energy. I only get excited about everything that we're doing.
Thanks. Hey, let's move on to the topic of carbon emission reporting. It's been a big effort for EEI and the member companies over the last couple of years. For our benefit, so there are three types of emissions. Scope and other fuels, like from the utilities to the customer, and then the scope 3 deals with the value chain. We're just curious how you guys think about and use all those things, and maybe what you're thinking as you go forward on that. Is there what should we know?
Steve, I think you know more about this than I do, maybe. So I'm going to let you lead off on this one.
Okay. Hopefully that's true. You actually always end up knowing more than I know about everything. So.
Oh, that's not.
I know about everything. So.
Oh, that's not.
Sorry, we'll stop our banter back and forth. So we have initiatives really to look at all three of the scopes of carbon emissions, and we do reporting, climate disclosure that we do, and we have a team in our sustainability group that does all of the carbon tracking, and we work to make sure that they've got the energy data that they need. So in terms of active management, scope 1, which is what we emit directly, that's something, of course, we're working on in terms of fleet efficiency, moving more cases using less fuel and less miles, and efforts like that are ongoing and will continue. In the energy department, that's really where we're dealing with the scope 2 emissions, what our utilities are emitting. So we're really working through all those channels. And then on the Project Gigaton on the scope 3 side, we've also just announced what we're calling the Gigaton PPA, which is a partnership between Walmart and Schneider Electric to bring our suppliers access to renewable opportunities at a larger scale through aggregated PPAs. And so that's something we've.
Well, I got to get a plug-in for EI and WRI as well as the member companies. I mean, they did a tremendous job of pulling together the database to provide the reporting of what the energy generation source is. So that's something that'll be produced annually, and hopefully it's been a big benefit. There's a way that some of this can help with some of the 24/7 low to no carbon objectives that Google has with its data center. I'm going to realize that is forward-looking, but I would think the same concepts could apply to some of the forward-looking materials.
Yeah. We recognize what we've done was our own internal analysis, right? So when we set this 24/7 goal, we really looked at every single data center we had all over the world, and we did a deep analysis on what that grid mix was. Even though we've been 100% renewable since 2007, and what we actually found is that on average, across all of our data centers across all the world, we were really only running about 60% of the time on renewable energy. And the rest of the time we were running on non-renewable energy because of that grid mix. When you look at it by hour. So for us, understanding the grid mix at an hourly level is super important, and we've done a lot of that analysis ourselves, and we've also developed some in-house tools and technologies to help us deal with those scope 1, scope 2 emissions, which looks like shifting some of our load. We have some new fancy Google algorithms, I guess you could say, that help us shift our load when the grid is clean. Have projects like DeepMind, which help us predict better when wind is going to generate. And really that's because we're focused on the hour, which when you start getting to that type of level, you start to recognize that, you can be at 100% renewable, but in some hours, you're not generating on any renewable energy. And so for us, I think that type of information was really impactful and helped us to go, okay, so how do we actually work to make the grid, which we're operating at, clean every hour, as opposed to just putting in enough energy or putting in enough renewables in the ground, to compensate for our load. And so that's where we're shifting. So I think the more finite the data is, the more refined it is from a timestamp level, I think really will help to craft programs and market designs that are forward thinking in those solutions. And I think open opportunities for different technologies that have specific hourly profiles. We know that renewables aren't, but there's a lot of room for demand response and energy efficiency during certain hours of the day. And if there's a big need during certain hours to get to that carbon free, that gives them more value. And so I think understanding that is really, really helpful.
Let me continue on with that. Is there anything else that we would benefit from, at least understanding kind of where you guys are planning to go next with your strategies around procurement and sourcing generation?
Yeah, it's a great question. In typical sort of fashion, we did the research to make sure possible, but not exactly. We haven't finalized exactly how we're getting there. So we're hoping that we will be working with our utility partners to get there. I think part of this is also, to the earlier comments, is sort of moving beyond the green tariff and moving beyond and moving to something that looks not just like a big solar procurement dump, but actually looks like stacking, energy efficiency, demand response, nuclear, hydro. Electric vehicles, I think, have a huge role to play. Electric vehicles, I think, have a huge role to play here. And then renewables, and actually piecing that together in a way that creates an entire block of power for the grid and utilizes what's already on the system. And so I think that's what we're moving. What we don't want to do, and we've learned this lesson, and I think everyone in large procurement space has learned this lesson. We don't want to dump a bunch of renewables onto the grid and then have them to be backfilled by carbon emitting energy because we haven't figured out how to create that full firm block of power. I think that looks like integrating programs and not isolating programs, and integrating technologies and not isolating them based on customer class. And so that's going to take a lot of work, but we're excited to do it, and hopefully it keeps me employed for at least 10 more years. So
great, that's helpful. Steve, would you add anything from Walmart's perspective to that?
So, definitely want to thank EEI and my customer counterparts and utility counterparts who worked on the database, because it's a really important resource. And Walmart is not to the hourly point yet. We have 11,000 facilities globally, so even just getting hourly energy usage data for that would probably be quite the tremendous mountain to climb. But by having it by grid footprint, we can, figure out what our carbon consumption is, what our cost risk is, which is a big thing for me, and then really, how do we need to manage it, whether behind the meter, on site, through energy efficiency, distributed energy resources, those sorts of things, or what sort of initiatives we need to look at with utilities. And Caroline brought up some really good points that highlight the disconnect between procurement and consumption. That you can go out and procure renewables, but if your load is in PJM, and the renewables in Texas, you're not consuming those renewables. You are bringing them to the grid, and there is value there, certainly. But as you look at carbon, is really about what comes into your building through the meter. And so, if you're sitting in an area that's very heavily, coal, you still have that carbon consumption and that carbon cost risk. And so this is a really important tool to help discern, really where those areas are and where the work needs to be done. In terms of the future of that, we certainly would like to see all of you, EEI members, if you're on the phone, please submit your data. But we also want to expand it beyond the fences of EEI. And somebody just put yep. Yep, you're on it. Yep, that's good. So thanks, Adam. And then we want to expand the usage because we have a lot of load served by non-investor-owned utilities or EEI members, and so there's still a lot of ground to be gained there. But yeah, that's what I have to add. Thank you.
Yeah, great. That was helpful. Jennifer, let me just ask. I had an influential role in the whole database thing. Is there anything you'd like to add to that conversation before we move on?
I think it's been a really important partnership. We are eager, our greenhouse gas protocol team recognizes that the work we've done, with you all has been an important step in trying to help the management of carbon and matching this consumption. As many of you know, that scope 2 is a tricky place, and where you can, as I think Carolyn, scope 2 is a tricky place, and where you can, as I think Carolyn laid out, you can have this mismatch, and Steve mentioned as well, you can have a mismatch between where and how your renewables support and your carbon consumption actually can vary. So this tool allows you to get a much closer picture, but we recognize that this is a continuing journey. And let me just say that I think one element that we know that many industries are moving forward with, and I think the utility sector is no different, is this sort of questions around science-based targets and how to implement those targets as cut into increasingly look at both the short and long-term science-based targets. What data and tools and information do they have at their fingertips, and where and how can we support them? And so we're eager to continue the partnership that we've been building with all of you to think about that next generation of tools and the next set of requirements that customers may have. So very eager to continue.
Thank you. So one last question before we open up to the audience, but for both of you guys, look, we're clearly in this together. The utility partners are at the table, and they're doing it, like I said, for the right reasons, us in that regard.
So I'll jump in. I'll say that we don't have nearly as many facilities in the United States as Walmart does, and spend a good amount of time on each of our facilities, and also we are willing to sort of be what we call in the industry sort of the anchor customer or the pilot test case. Moving forward, assuming that it's within reason from a cost perspective and meets our internal agenda, we're always willing to partner to create something new. That's sort of Google's MO. So I think that the biggest thing of Google's MO. So I think that the biggest thing I would say right now is that I wouldn't wait for the traditional regulatory calendar to drive when we start making these conversations happen, and when we start thinking about we start thinking about innovative new ways to do this, because I find that when that happens, we end up being in a situation where time becomes the enemy, and we get boxed out of really being able to work with each other. So I think it's important that we are constantly having these conversations, and really also being willing to say we might work outside that calendar for a while until we get something, until we can engage our commission counterparts and engage our other stakeholders. Let's not all wait until the next rate case or the next IRP to talk about this stuff. Let's be doing it actively all the time, and so we can get to where we want to be sooner.
Great. Steve, would you add anything to that?
So I think Carolyn really hit the nail on the head in terms of, continuing that conversation. We've been in conversations with many utilities, for the last 10, 15 years around renewables. And, we certainly need to continue, but we also need to expand that conversation. That conversation to start talking about zero carbon. I think it's important to remember that, ultimately we buy three products from a utility. We buy the electrons, we buy reliability, which is, the 5 nines when everything's going well, and we buy resilience when we need to recover and restore. So we have to be able to look at what are the appropriate options for all three paths, where those paths overlap, and what that looks like. Because as we look at the future, solar and wind are pretty easy paths to look at, providing green electrons solve for the 5 nines or solve the resilience question. So, what are the technologies that are going to deliver the 5 nines? Caroline's mentioned nuclear. There's talk of hydrogen, there's expansion of hydro, carbon capture and sequestration. What are the technologies that really, for wind and spread them out across the 24/7 of every day? And then on the resilience side, that's a really big growing area of concern for us as we're about to work our fourth hurricane in about a month this weekend, and looking at it's going to be diesel. And we have to look at what technologies could step in there, because it's not just about keeping the lights on for one night. When big storms come through and you have serious system issues, that we may have to have a generator on there for really long extended periods of time, be economic, be feasible in terms of fitting on our facility, that sort of thing. And it's also going to drive sort of how we think about delivering renewables. There's a lot of really good discussion out there right now around bringing remote renewables. But as we look at the resilience side and look at Entergy's experience in Hurricane Laura, where if I'm remembering correctly, every transmission line that serves Southwest Louisiana went down, some of them catastrophically. All the wind in the Midwest doesn't help us at that time. So what are clean local resources that we can look at to ensure that we're able to optimize and really leverage the scale of the transmission grid, but also ensure that at all times we have clean resources to keep our facilities and our communities powered up.
Yeah, sounds like I need to come to Bentonville.
Yeah, sounds like you do. You got a lot to talk about.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff in there. That's a whole nother seminar. But it is. I can tell you firsthand. In the last storm, we had a customer down in Louisiana. I want to say maybe it was Texas. It was on service for 21 days, running diesel generators for 21 days.
Mm-hmm.
And
yep.
It happens a lot. So, and the gas lines do go down. The lines do go down just like the transmission lines do sometimes. So. Hey, I want to squeeze in one more question, but let's be really quick, because I realize there might be some people on here who are not as advanced as you guys. Google and Walmart are way down the road relative to most everybody. But so somebody that's just starting out, or just started it, what would be your short advice as to where to focus and start?
I so I'll tell you what we've learned over the past decade, and I think it's been reiterated throughout this conversation, but to drive it home, you know your footprint, know your facility, know your grid, because what the investments you make in these sustainability goals are going to be in the ground for 20 to 30 years, and where they're put, and how they help the entire local economy and the entire grid, I think is really important. So really understanding your load shape, really understanding what technologies are best for your particular facility need, and then understanding what technologies are best for your grid need is really important. I think that the grid could handle a lot more renewables than it has on it right now, and I do think is that if we want to get to this scale that we want to get to, if we want to empower the number of businesses that we want to see, that Steve and I work with together in REBA every day to make this path, we need to make sure that we're doing it very thoughtfully and locally. And we need to make sure that we're doing it in a way that my advice is really, really, really understand your system first before participating in anything. And then also, there are a lot of quick plug for Reba, but there are a lot of other companies that are willing to sort of share their knowledge on this and done things poorly and created bad programs or signed bad PPAs, and are willing to talk about that. And I think the other thing is, and this is sort of, I think a truth to a good program is that, Steve and I have worked on program designs with utilities before that work for both, with very different load shapes and data centers. And so if we can do that, I think that there's opportunity to sort of scope in many different, load shapes and many different facilities. So really know your grid, really know your facility. And then the other thing is that, just procurement is not enough. We've got to work on the tariffs. We've got to work on the rate design. They've got to fit. Adding a bunch of renewables to the system without changing the way we look at our rate structures is just going to end up, with butting heads. Our rate structures is just going to end up, with butting heads, down the road. And so make sure that you're thinking about both when you get into this, and what type of tariffs do we really need, and push on that to get this amount of renewables and carbon-free energy on the system working, well.
Sure. So I think it's a variation on the theme that Caroline presented, but really is first focus on your facilities. How are you using energy? Have facilities. How are you using energy? Have you done everything you can on energy efficiency? Is that a focal point, which it needs to be? Are you taking advantage of distributed energy resources? And where that really ties in and is important is from a carbon standpoint. The electricity you don't consume through your energy efficiency efforts and the more efficient use of energy, or the electricity you produce with clean resources behind the meter, that directly offsets your carbon emissions. So it's one for one. So those kilowatt hours are critical, and that's the first place I would start. From there, work outwards. What are local resource or community options like community solar, or some states allow for shared community solar resources. How can or look at microgrids. How can you look at the facility as well as your surrounding community? From there, you move to the utility options. Work with your utility. Again, this can touch on energy efficiency. It can touch on renewables. In the future, it will touch on zero carbon. And find out what sort of programs and other opportunities are available. And if you have capacities to do those procedures, and a lot of that, steps into regulatory, which for a lot of customers isn't necessarily a comfortable area, but that's where a lot of it goes on. And then finally, look at the relevant regional options to drive larger scale deployments. Because ultimately, for whatever you're doing on renewables and zero carbon, you want to keep renewables and zero carbon. You want to keep it as close to the power that's coming into your meter or behind your meter as possible in order to get the best bang for your buck, and really drive the positive change that you're looking to do.
Okay, thanks. Thank you, Steve. So we're at this point that, okay, thanks. Thank you, Steve. So we're at this point that we want to open to audience questions. So if you would like to ask a question, this always varies. Like, please feel free to use the chat, or if you just want to turn your video on and ask a question, that works too. Yesterday we had a super active chat. Today we don't. But Adam, I think you have a couple of questions there. So do you want to start with a question?
Well, Tanuj always asks great questions, and I don't think we gave him airtime yesterday. So, Tanuj, why don't you, call out your question, put your camera up, say hello to the crowd, recognize you.
Thanks, Adam. Thanks, Lisa. I'm in a spicy mood this morning, so looking a little provocatively. I know there's been some fantastic leadership from both our panelists and their companies and others as well through REBA when it comes to corporate procurement's lingering challenge throughout the few years I've been paying attention to this is a little bit of maybe zero-sum thinking is a little too aggressive, but just a little bit of looking at just our own impact. If you think about scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 emissions, that's great. I wonder if there's a scope 4 in terms of the policy sets that those organizations are advocating for, or thinking about not only direct emissions reductions, but the community emissions reductions. And I'm thinking specifically about some of the positions around system benefit charges and valuing the benefits from other demand sources decarbonizing as well, since we do have an electric power system. Be curious just to get a reaction from our panelists on those issues, and thinking about both what is the position, has it evolved over time, and then B, are there ways that we can work more collaboratively, not just about individual corporate goals, but also collectively on the system together?
Yeah, I'll say that you hit the nail on the head in terms of thinking in a tunnel vision for Google, and now trying to be able to meet our 24/7 goals without having a much broader vision and without having a much broader buy-in and major policy change. And that's going to look like new tariffs, new market structures, new value stacks. It's from getting hybrids to be able to play in existing markets to, other things like merging a DSM and energy efficiency programs on the residential side with an industrial off-taker that can come hours that aren't maybe necessary on the residential side, and creating those stacks. So for us, what we're looking at this is like Jenga, right? Or reverse Jenga, I guess, where we're trying to figure out how do you best layer these hour by hour. And what we're finding is, for the most part, it's there, but they haven't been forced to talk to each other because they've been treated as isolated components in the grid. So energy efficiency does this during these hours. Demand response does this during these hours, and they're treated as such. Wind has this, solar has this, and storage is, still evolving to figure out where we're putting it in each place. But we haven't found out how to make them talk to each other. And part of that is that we don't have tariffs that incentivize that talking. But we're also just at the precipice of this. 6 or 7 years ago, it just wasn't even cost effective to think about this. Now it is, and I think it's cost effective to think about this. Now it is, and I think it's also a testament to the way we've sort of done energy policy, whereas that everyone sort of sits in their own little fiefdom and says, well, I'm really focused on this one thing, as opposed to saying, well, I'm focused on a holistic, again, 24/7 one thing, as opposed to saying, well, I'm focused on a holistic, again, 24/7 solution. And how do we actually let our one thing that we're great at, whether it be a certain technology or a certain program design, talk to each other? And so that we absolutely know that if we just focus on each of our data centers, we're actually never going to achieve this. And so it's very, very, very important for us. So that policy looks incredibly different. And I think sort of sky's the limit, but I guess this is sort of my soapbox call to say, we need to stop focusing on siloed and really start layering the cake better.
If I could jump in.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I wanted to just say, I think we are entering a new phase here. I think for most of the corporates that we've seen partnering with, there is this recognition of, we've gone, if we really are serious about decarbonization and about decarbonizing for corporate procurement, we have to decarbonize the system, and that we are now in a systems thinking approach. And I think that's a big shift from where we were 10 years ago, 5 years ago, even a few years ago, tactics, tools, and partnerships. And I think, I think REBA is going to lead the charge on this. I think there's going to be huge opportunities for principles for utility programs and tariffs that are going to be relevant in an integrated system-wide approach that we haven't seen in past conversations.
Graded the system is 10 years from now. Just given where the technology is and the technologies being employed, I mean, it takes a long time to put this stuff in, but I think 10 years it's going to be a completely different situation. It may still be more regional, but I think a lot of things that were mentioned in the discussion.
So I'll jump in as well, because I know one part of the question certainly was targeted at some of the work that we've done. As we look big picture, ultimately, remember that regulation serves as a substitution for competition. You have regulated monopolies and competition. You have regulated monopolies and, regulators that have to price regulate them. So, monopoly rents aren't exercised and all sorts of that. Economics 101 stuff that, we don't need to jump too deep into. And so, as you look at, within that framework, everything that needs to happen programmatically is ultimately because either the utility is regulated or because you have some sort of failure within the pricing to use energy at this time or not that time and that sort of thing. And so if all we're doing is pancaking programs, we're actually probably not finding the most cost-effective and efficient way to get there. And so, for example, average rates. I mean, regardless of what time you use it, yeah, you're going to need energy efficiency programs because nobody's going to get any sort of meaningful price signal to say, hey, maybe I shouldn't use energy when it's actually 25 cents a kilowatt hour. So we really have to fundamentally relook at how we do pricing, how we reflect the underlying costs and rates, and that's not necessarily an easy path. So, so I think we certainly part of the next 20 years of discussion is going to be about rethinking the system. And Mark made a really good point about how much more tightly integrated it's going to be. But I think that integration isn't going to be driven by a patchwork of programs. It's going to be driven by hopefully better pricing, better access to pricing, and better understanding by all customers of their pricing, better access to pricing, and better understanding by all customers of the roles of technology of managing that sort of pricing and appropriately compensating customers for doing so. FERC recognized this in Order 2222 last week or 2 weeks ago. Work to be done to sort of unleash the potential that's out there. So, there's a lot of serious rethinking that has to happen.
I couldn't agree more, Steve. I think that we one thing we often miss in this whole conversation, in order to get to the other side of this problem, we have to create a business opportunity. And whoever the business is, whether it's from the customer side or the supplier side, we have to create a business opportunity. And unless we get the right signals there, the right opportunities for that innovation, it will become something that I think ultimately is waste. We're going to spend more money than we need to, right, to do this. And so we're going to spend more money than we need to, right, to do this. And so it is about going back to the drawing board and not thinking about saying, or not doing what we've done, which has sort of been technology lock-in, and said, okay, we're going to solve a market problem to facilitate these three technologies, whether that was 50 years ago, to facilitate these three technologies, whether that was 50 years ago, putting a bunch of fossil fuels on the system so that we could generate, rural economy, or over the past 10 years where it's going to be like, okay, so how do we just rush and get solar and wind on the system? But instead going, how do we create a pricing structure that actually allows for carbon technologies to compete in a way that produce solutions, as opposed to just sort of artificially putting them on there, because that's going to create both an engineering and I think a commerce problem. So couldn't agree more.
Thanks all. Hey, Steve Kidwell's session, kind of continuing this conversation around doing the Jenga, thinking out and making this all work. And Danny, I see your question too, similar with how do you plan for this, right? When you know that the utilities are also upgrading their, the clean energy resources on the system writ large. So, Steve, you're not connected on voice, so he cannot elaborate. You see his question in the chat. Steve is not connected to my voice, but his question is: would Walmart and Google support development of retail market platforms? Maybe run by utilities to do the Jenga, the making this with the financial and fiscal sides of the transaction. This is sort of looking out and thinking about how can these more moving from annual to more matching of monthly, weekly, 5-minute loads. How can that all kind of work, and what's the role of utility from the customer's perspective?
I guess I'll jump in first, and I apologize that I'm not totally sure what that construct would look like. So my answer may be different with more detail around the proposed construct, but I mean, we already pay utilities to do the Jenga. I mean, that's where we already pay utilities to do the Jenga. I mean, that's where our 8 cents a kilowatt hour comes from.
Right.
The costs are all there. The costs are all granular, hourly, 15-minute, whatnot, and it's the utilities that basically do the risk management for us. And in states that basically do the risk management for us. And in states that have deregulated generation, we have broader choice to figure out who does that Jenga for us, and the different entities get to compete to provide that service, and drive the cost of the service down because they sort of excise the fat from the process. So I think ultimately, if the goal is retail choice, then you'd want to go to retail choice. I don't think the United States that have shown that can be successful. So that might not be the answer you wanted to hear, but that's the answer.
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure what if retail market platform looks like, that are competitively sourced, or what exactly that looks like. But I'd probably sort of echo Steve's sentiments, which is that, the utility, especially the regulated utility that has control over an entirely vertically integrated system, already has the tools to do this. It's just a pivot to do so.
Right. Danny, you had a question. Do you want to sort of expand on your question? State it, turn your video on. and ask the panel. Your video on and ask the panel.
Yeah. So my question was around both Walmart and Google, and how they're determining whether through on-site resources, distributed generation, or through PPAs, or through PA required to be carbon neutralities are essentially making the same commitments on the same time frames. What may be a 70% offset of renewable carbon today may be diminished as they increase their renewables to their portfolio with 2035, 2040 commitments as well.
Actually got most of that. If someone else did, that would be helpful. I don't know if it was just on my end and was breaking up.
The question is in the chat though. So
I work for a tech.
So the question ultimately is determining how much carbon reduction through on-site or off-site means will be required. How are we calculating that, but also simultaneously accounting for what utilities are trying to do with renewables and zero carbon resources over the same time frame. So I can jump on that first. It's a really good question. And at this point, it's going to be a question of resource allocation. So, historically, we haven't done a ton of resource planning dockets as Walmart, but we're going to have to start getting more involved in that, starting to have more of those conversations with utilities as these things get planned, so that we know where we can focus that work. Because it's even today, projects have different carbon value parts of the country, and if we have the data and know what we're dealing with, and the carbon database is a really good example of a resource to help support this kind of work. But we're going to have to commit more resources to tracking it as part of our planning, and that work is beginning now, and sort of thought through what it is that we need to do to achieve those.
Similarly, we know we're going to have to get involved more in IRPs and more in the grid planning. I think we also are, because of the nature of our facilities and the fact that we're still growing load and that we're still, dropping 100 megawatt facilities throughout the country. We also think we have the opportunity to create brand new contract structures, brand new approaches, and sort of innovative technology sharing approaches with our utility partners. I'll also say that this is forcing us to actually invest in the development, whether from a policy investment side and our capacity there, or direct Google investment into the technologies that we think are going to be needed to meet this goal, which is something, or we've always been, Google's always backed clean tech in one way or another, but I think we'll be taking a much more aggressive approach there. And then I think also you'll see us invest more time in the behind the meter analysis, the behind the meter toolkit, where we know we're doing everything on our side to make sure that there's less to do on the utility and grid side. And so I think all of the above, yeah.
Okay.
Jennifer, do you want to add anything to that?
comments, really this is where we're going to get to system-wide decarbonization, is through these kinds of dialogues. I know we're short on time, but I'm eager to talk a little bit about that, because if we view our assets as a much more expansive set of facilities, batteries, transportation, much more comprehensively about how we create the right incentive structures and encourage the kind of innovation that we're talking about needing as we think about a fully decarbonized system.
Thank you. We are sort of at the end of our time here. Mark, do you?
Steve and Caroline and to Jennifer for their time and participation. It's been very good.